Okay, welcome back. So I've been looking at some reference to the house here. And if we look at our house in comparison to that house, we're actually pretty close. Now, one thing I did notice was that this is not a skylight. It actually does appear to be recessed into the house. So before we do anything else, we're going to fix that. And I also said I would take a look to see if this had a lip on it. It appears to be a flat piece from what I can see. So this appears to be okay. This is definitely a bit of a mistake. Now, I quite like the skylight, but even so, let's get it matched to the plans. It's a fairly interesting modeling exercise as well. So I'm going to move this out so we can see it to work on it. But in order to get it back into the same position, I'm going to freeze its transformations. So at the moment, if I look under the channel box, if I move this, I've got no real way of getting it back to where it was unless I memorize these numbers, which I don't plan on doing really. So I'm going to modify freeze transformation, and it sets everything back to its 0 position. And then if I move this out to work on it, I just need to set it back to 0 and it will go back to where it should be. So let's move this out to work on it. And the first thing I want to do is build a box inside here, because our window frame is going to sit back here somewhere. So let's select an edge. And this is the traditional way without the modeling toolkit, extrude edge, and I'm going to click there to change the handle of the move, so we can just get it like so, easy peasy. And then we'll need to merge these vertices together, so you can either select the vertex and go to merge vertex, which we'll find here on the marking menu. So merge vertices, there we go. Or you can use the target weld, whichever you're in the mood for. I'm going to use target weld. There we go, done. And the same on this side, done. Okay, so that leaves us with the sides to build. So I'm going to select the edges. And I'm going to extrude backwards. So we go like so. Now I can grab the verts. Whoops, I'm going to grab too many there. And I still might have grabbed some too many. There we go. And now I can make these straight again. There, scale them until they're straight. And now I can come in, move them back here, and use the target weld to join them together. So let's see where that last one is. There we go. And you know, if you don't have Maya 2015, just use the Merge Verts tool. There, so we do the same on the other side. So once again, edge mode. And extrude edge. Straighten them up. Magic. And move them in. Nothing too complicated about, oops, I think that was actually wrong, it was. Nothing too complicated about actually boxing this out. No, got it again, there we go. You know, the important thing is that we've preserved the curve in the roof, and we've done that. Okay, so we've got one last hole in here that might be an issue, but I should be able to just select the edges and bridge across this. Should be fine. And there we go, done. So now we need to get the window in it. So let's grab our old frame, because our old frame will be eminently reusable, I would think. It's just going in here now. So there we go. And now our old frame is a little too large because we scaled it up to fit that slanted bay window. So I'm going to sort of bring this till it's about here. There we go. and then I'll need to, of course, scale this into the appropriate size. Okay, there we go. So the window on the plan is a little more like that. Now I will just move this back and channel box, so I can just translate that back to 0. Then of course position this one, done. And now I've got no hole in the back of the building, so I'm also going to have to put a hole in the back of the building. So I'm going to go to the multi-cut tool here, and I'm going to put one there and one there. And let's see here, maybe we already have some edges there. Yeah, that will do. Done and done. Now we can see through that window into the building. Okay, so now it just needs its window frames. So that would now fit the little ones as it did on the plan. Sorry, I should have thought about that, but you know, it did appear there for a second that it was just a skylight. Unfortunately not. Okay, so a bit bigger for these windows maybe. There we go. And Control D and duplicate across. And tad bit smaller. There we go. Okay, so there's that window as it should have been according to the plan, I believe. Now, I'm not sure, but I think that this floor might actually slope a bit. That would make some sort of sense to me. So I'm actually going to just slope it in a bit. I'll select these edges as well, actually. And just slope it down a little bit to give the roof a slightly more interesting shape. There we go. Alright, so that's about what I'm going to do with this window. Now I'll just go ahead and make our windows white here. Just makes them slightly easier to see when we're spinning around in the 3D view. There we go. Now, if we look at the photograph as well, you can see, if I make that a little larger, that here around this window we have some sort of ivy growing out of it, and some ivy here. Now I'm going to show you how to do that as well before the end of the tutorial. Right now I just want to have a look, and pretty much we've got all the windows done now except this bay window, which I'm going to do on a part unto itself because it's actually one of the more complicated windows we'll do. And now I want to do the front door before we go. So this front door appears to be surrounded by a couple of these huge heavy beams. So I'm just going to duplicate these and move them back. And that kind of makes sense to me that it would be, because you know the whole house is supported by these great big beams. And also I think we should probably have one that goes across the top there. So I'm going to take this one and duplicate it and push it back. F to focus on the piece, and zoom out a bit. And this is going to get a bit fiddly working under here. So we could hide some of this geometry, but if you needed to, there we go. So that's built out kind of the door frame there. Now let's put in the door. Now the door looks relatively simple to me. It's just a basic door frame with your bog standard panel door, which I'd actually do in the texture. So let's bring in a box to model the frame in. Okay, so the frame's going to be kind of like so. Okay, that seems about right. And I want to grab one of these inner faces like so and extrude. And I'm going to reset the extrude tool. And then I'm going to scale extrude. So just scale it in there. Maybe a little bit more on the sides. There we go. And that will provide the basis for our frame. So in this case, I'm going to delete this face. I'm going to delete the back face. Actually, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to extrude this face inwards. Let me just bring this out on the perspective so you can have a look at it. So there is our door at the moment, and it's a bit thick, so let's just get that more door-like. Nice big thick solid door for a house like this, I think. And face mode, and extrude it inwards. You don't want to bisect the back face there, so just get it to about there. Done. And again, I'm going to put a lip on this, so there we go. And I'm going to extrude that lip inwards a little bit. Nothing we haven't done before at this point. Okay, so that gives us a basic frame. And, you know, I'll probably select some edges on this to bevel, but I'll leave that to you for now. And then I'm going to just take the door, which is pretty simple as well. So let's bring the door up. And let's scale it to approximately the right size. Let's see what we're dealing with here. Okay, like so. Okay, let's make sure it's the right thickness. Object mode. So there's our door. I'm going to cut this hole in it for what looks like these iron railings. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay. Okay, now that gives us a problem because we've got no depth to this, so we can just easily fix that. We can select our edges here. Caps lock, sorry, 2, 3 and 4, and then we can extrude them backwards like so. And then we can use the merge vertices or target weld to kind of weld them to the back position on the door there. So let's do that. And this is going to be a bit fiddly. Here we go. Vertice 1 and 1 and focus. Whoops. Okay, let me select a vert on this door. Sorry, camera's gone a bit haywire, but I'm going to select one of these verts and hit F to focus in on it. There we go. Now I can easily get around. Perfect. So multi-cut, not multi-cut, target weld. Done. Done. And last one. Done. Okay, so that's merged all those together. Now we could put these iron bars in it, but let's just make sure that it fits in our door frame. Okay, that seems to be a pretty adequate fit there. Actually, it'd probably be slightly proud. So okay, close enough, I think. Now I'm just going to use a series of pipes or cylinders to make the iron bars. So let's just bring those up, and I'm going to have to scale those down and then up a bit. Okay, that still looks a bit too big. So I'm just going to look at my front reference in a photograph because it's kind of obscured here for the minute. Okay, so according to the front reference, it's just 1, 2 and 1, 2, so nice and simple for us. Oops, and where's my poly pipe gone? Let's grab in the outliner. There it is. Okie dokie. And yeah, that's a little bit big. That still seems a little bit too wide to me. There we go. And scale it up this way. So really we've got 1 and Control D, 2, and I'm going to eyeball this in. You might want to follow the plan a bit better. And Control D, and that would be this away. Again, this comes down to a time consideration. If I was going to shoot the house from the perspective of the front door, then of course I would put a door lock on and all sorts of little details, which we may still get time to get around to. Okay, so there we go. Door with those iron bars in, which I've left out here. And there we go. Okay, so few other details remaining. This bay window being the most important of which, that ivy on the roof will be actually quite fun to do. But for right now, I think in the next part I want to come back and sort that bay window out. That will be the last of our windows. Now obviously you have the back of the house, but I'm not actually going to cover that on this tutorial. As I've said, I'm going to leave that to you because the back and the front are pretty much identical really, certainly in terms of technique and what you'll need to build and stuff. Alright, so thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next part. Hi, welcome back. So we're continuing with the detailing on our house now, and I've saved the most complicated window, which is this bay window, for the last. So if I go into the front view and have a quick look at this window, you'll see that it's actually not as simple as the others. It's got this kind of rounded plinth thing on the bottom along with a windowsill and a couple of extra lips, and this thing up here which goes outwards like so. So, you know, not the easiest window will do, but the actual frame itself looks like a pretty standard window frame. So for that reason, I'm just going to come up here, Control D, and reuse this window. Now, we've been playing around with our Move tool quite a bit recently. So just a tip for you, you can always come in, and where we've reset this to local maybe, or object for moving, you can just hit the reset tool and that will put it back to default. So if you're having problems moving stuff around, it could be because you've changed this to say, in this case, everything's going to remain consistent. But there you go. If you'd have put it on normal, for instance, the tools disappeared. So, you know, be aware that you can always come back in and reset your tools if you need to. Okay, so I'm going to get this window in position, and for this I'm going to use the top view here. So this is our bay window, and should have one window that comes to about here. There we go. So I'm going to duplicate this now, and I'm going to put in these side windows. So we'll rotate that round till it's approximately in position, and you're about here. Maybe a bit more on the rotation. Oops, that's not the one I wanted. There we go. So that should be about right, but now it's of course too long, so I'll just open up all four views here, and I want to grab these vertex. Okay, let's get the right one. There we go. See, now it's playing silly buggers on me. So come in here and grab the vertex for this window. Okay, this is just, and this is okay. Right, sorry about that. Maya just having a bit of a conniption on me. And now I'm going to move these vertex. So again, I'll need to change my move tool to object. So when I move these in, I kind of get it like so, and we want it so it's just about there. Okay, so that seems to fit in the window at the moment. Now I can take this, duplicate it across, and move tool to world, and just move this in here, rotate it into position. There we go, that looks about right, and grab it here. We can always make small tweaks later on. All I'm looking for at the moment is for these two back edges here to pretty much line up with each other. There we go. Like so. And the same on this one. These two back edges should pretty much line up with each other, and this one's looking pretty good there. Now that's given us the basic shape of our bay window. Now we're going to need to kind of fill in these holes because you need a fair bit of draft excluder for this window at the moment, and in order to do this I'm going to merge these verts together, but you know, I can't at the moment. If I go into vertex mode and then try and go into this one and go into vertex mode, I can't get both at the same time. So I'm going to select all three objects and go to Mesh, Combine. Okay, this will combine the objects, so now when I go into vertex mode I get the vertex for all of them. So I could use the modeling toolkit here and do a target weld. I could also just select both verts and click merge. So again, whichever you're comfortable with, and I've got to get the ones down the bottom too. So there we go, and there we go. Now I could do the same technique up here, grab this one and hit target weld, but this is going to give us a rather nasty edge on our window frame. That just doesn't look right at all. So let's undo that, and instead of that I'm going to select this vert, shift and right click, and go to merge vertices, merge to center, and that way they'll merge into the center there. So that just gives us a nice option for putting those together with a center point. So once again, just merge verts, merge to center. And of course the same on the other two windows, this one. So I can just actually press G now to repeat the last command. Okay, and that's given us our bay window all nicely joined together and ready to be put into position. So, you know, we just need to put the window glass in it now, but we've got all these sort of decorative facade bits on it. So let's deal with the top one first. So for me, this looks like this window should be a bit taller. So grab these vertices and move it up to about here. And then it looks like it's got a little window lip on here. So right now I'm going to center the pivot on this because we've joined some objects together. Maya didn't know what to do with the pivot, so just modify center pivot. I'm going to pull this out just so I can get it away from the building and start to have a look at it. So this lip on the top for us can just be a case of taking these faces, then extruding the faces outwards. There we go, just a little bit, just room for that lip there, so kind of like so. And then I'm going to want to extrude the faces out here as well, so this one and this one. Remember to hold shift to select both and extrude, and that gives me a little lip out there, maybe a little bit more. Okay, and I also think that I'm going to have to make an assumption here, but that lip would be a little bit proud. So again, select the faces, and you can just actually select this one and double click on this one. Oh, in this case you cannot. No, that's not going to work, so we're going to have to do it the hard way and extrude, and that gives me a lip out there. So our window frame already starts to look a little more complicated, which is good. Now we've got some faces that also need extruding, so I'm going to take this face, and this face and extrude them upwards till they hit here on our plan. So there we go, and I'm going to hit extrude again because I want those faces again, and finally I'm going to extrude again, and I don't want it quite that high, I want it that high, and to get this part I'm just going to hit R to scale the faces and scale them out like so until they marry up. Okay, so there is the top part of our window done. Now obviously we need to go in and put some bevels along here, but we'll do that at the end. What we need to do now is get the bottom part of the window done. So I can see we've got another lip on the bottom, so let's come down and grab these faces here. Just extrude them down, probably not that much. There we go, just sort of to there will do, I should think, maybe a little bit less. And I'm going to Q to pick faces again, this one, and extrude just a bit more than that. There we go. So that's given us a bottom lip. Now we need to make it proud from the frame. So again, extrude, a little bit too much maybe. There we go, that should do it. We can adjust these a bit later on, so it's not hugely important to get them exactly right, but the closer you get them now, the less work you're going to have to do later on. So, and select these bottom faces and just extrude downwards. That gives us that little lip there. And now we're going to need to do this kind of corner brace edge thing. Now we could model that in polys, but I'm going to use a different technique with NURBS. Now we looked at using a Bezier curve before, so I'll use a Bezier curve, but this time I won't be able to revolve it. So I just wanted to show you a different way that you could get geometry out of these curves. So let's go to create Bezier curve, and then I can come in here on this view and just start drawing my curve out. So I'll start at the bottom here, point 1, point 2, 3, 4, and then I'll want a point where the curve is, and then I'll want a point here. And to close a Bezier curve, which we didn't have to do before because we revolved around it, we're going to have to press Ctrl Shift and click on the last point, and that closes the curve. Now I can press Ctrl Shift, come over to here, and there we go. Get a nice curve on that. Okay, looks to match the reference pretty closely to me. Now I'll press Enter to finish with my curve, and let's go and move that to approximately where the window would be. There we go. So I've got a curve. Perfect. Now I need a polygon. I'm just going to center the pivot on this. So before we revolved around, and this wouldn't work here, this would give us, in fact I'll revolve around it just so you can see exactly what it would give us. I'll just go to Surfaces, Revolve, and we get basically a cylinder with a, so not at all what we're looking for. So I could go Control Duplicate and move one out here, select the two and loft between them. So Surfaces, where are we? Surfaces, Loft, and that would give me the geometry that way. So that's one option, and then I can fill in the middle. Another option is to let's just delete this one, go to Surfaces and Planar, which will fill in the middle of the geometry. So Surfaces, Planar, and there you go. I get this very nice NURBS surface. I'm going to have to center the pivot. Okay, so I get this very nice NURBS surface. Now I need to turn that into a polygon. So modify, convert NURBS to polygons, and there we go. This has given me this polygon object, and again I'm going to have to center the pivot. So there we go. So from the Bezier curve to the NURBS object to the polygon, and it's purple because it's telling me it's still connected to the curve. So we'll deal with that in a second. In fact, let's deal with that now. So just edit, delete by type, history. And when I select this curve, you'll see the NURBS surface is still purple because it's still connected to the curve, but the poly object is not. Now the first thing I want to do with this poly object is get rid of any extraneous geometry. So I'm going to take these edges because they're not necessary. And right click, and delete edges. Now that's created a bit less geometry for us. I'm now going to do a vertex base and just see if we've got any kind of double edges or any extra vertex in there. So you can do the same thing by looking at the vertex. There's an extra vertex. We'll get rid of that, and probably maybe one down here. Yeah, okay, you do not want these extra verts hanging about. And I can actually see that there's an extra vertex down here of all places. So get rid of that. Let's check here. No, so could be one at the top as well. Let's have a look. Doesn't appear to be. And just to make sure we haven't got anything that's unmerged, so we could have two vertices sitting practically on top of each other, I can just come into here and edit mesh, merge components. Now on an older version this will just be merge vertices. I go like so, and the result was it merged one polyvert. So we had somewhere in here two vertices sitting right on top of each other that we don't have anymore. Okay, so now I've got my object thusly. I can select all the faces and just hit extrude. And we'll make it a little thicker. And there we go. Now we've got a nice kind of bit that we can put under our window, get it to size and make it fit. So I'll probably use the no, I think I'll actually eyeball this one in. So just rotate it a little bit. There we go. And I can use the top view a tad to get that in. There we go. And now I can just come in here. Let me make this view bigger and get this into position. So I'll change the move tool handle to object, and that way I can just pull it about a bit easier. And it's not wide enough, so let's scale it up. Okay, and it also needs to be a little bigger. Okay, that should about do it. So, you know, I urge you to take a bit more time, but these things, they can just take a little bit of time to get into the correct position. There we go. So it still needs to be a little bit bigger. Let's come out so it's... Okay, that looks pretty darn good to me. Alright, any kind of tiny indiscrepancies we can clean up later on. I just want to get the basic shape. So I'm going to duplicate this now, and then I shall rotate it. Snap its rotation, probably about there. And we'll have to line the one up now on this side. Okay, so I'm going to have to come in and do a bit better job on the rotation than that. There we go, that looks a little better. And into place. Done. And done. So that's given us our side pieces. Now we need the piece in the middle, so let's dip back to the front view. And I really don't think I'm going to need these again, but just in case I need them, I'll just select them if I can. There we go, and Control H to hide them out of the way. Alright, let's look again at our front view. Okay, so this is just a big block of wood in between, and then there's kind of a decorative lip on the bottom. So in order to get that, I can probably bridge across this thing. Let's just try that with face bridge. And I'm going to need them to be a single object, so I'll have to go mesh combine. Okay, and let's select the face here and hit bridge, and that does exactly what we needed it to do. So let's undo that, go in, select all the faces and bridge them all at the same time. And bridge. There we go, perfect. So that's kind of got that under part nicely done without too much faffing around. Now let's get the, let's see here. Let's get this last decorative piece done. So let's come in, and on this one our faces are fairly unusual shape. So I'm actually gonna do this as a separate piece of geometry. Now you don't have to join all your geometry together. I know some people, when they start, are quite keen to try and make everything out of one object, but really it's not necessary. If something's made out of a couple of pieces in real life, then, you know, making it out of a couple of pieces in 3D is very much okay. So I'm going to take this here and I'm just going to create this bottom lip. So I want one that stands slightly proud here, and I'll just take the vertex and come out here and just clip the edge like so, and I'll take this one over here and just clip the edge a little bit. Okay, now I'm going to come out and I'm going to take a face from this. I'm going to extrude it downwards, maybe not quite that much. Let's just move the extrusion up a little bit, and then I'm going to take the faces here and extrude these out as well. Okay, so that gives us a bit of a decorative lip down here. Now really this window is pretty much done. You know, it's looking pretty good there. I'm going to just have to take this and move it down just a little bit, I think. And I'll use the same trick of beveling these edges so it looks like these are separate components, because it probably should look like these are separate components. So we're going to have to come in and bevel now, which I'm going to do individually. So I'm going to select the edges like so that I want to bevel, and bevel them. There you go, I lost that for a second, and that's obviously far too much. There we go. So I'm not actually going to make you watch me bevel all these edges, but you know, you can pick which ones you think would benefit from a bevel. So in this case, this edge along here definitely would, I think. So just double click to select them all and bevel that in. Just makes it all a bit nicer. Same with this, so Q and bevel it all in. And definitely this bottom is going to require a fairly large bevel, and for this I think we could probably bevel the whole thing. So just go to Edit Mesh, Bevel Edge, there we go, and probably a bit bigger to my mind. So if I look poly bevel and the fraction 0.5 maybe, there we go. So you know, I'm going to leave that to you. I'm just going to throw this bay window into place, make sure it fits, and put in the center window glass. So there we go. Hopefully we've got a window that fits, and magic, we've got a window that fits. Okay, I think it might need to come out a bit more. There we go. Okay, so some of these edges might need extending a little bit, and I mean we can just take the vertex of the whole side of the window and move it in a little bit, or you could scale it a little bit. There's a myriad of ways we could put that in there, but for now I just want to move it a little bit and move it a little bit out. So I'll just kind of get that into position where I need it. There we go. And then of course I do the same with the other side. Making sure that I grab all of them. So just a little bit in, and on this side that should actually do it a little bit to match the bottom. There we go. Okay, but you know, I'll leave you to play with that. That's going to depend on how far out you were in your original estimate. That seems about right to me. So the last thing to do is obviously to put some window glass in. And with a bit of luck, these will fit. Just about. Let's see, how far out are these? They're pretty good. They might have to be a bit smaller this way. And then they should fit just about right. So Control D, let's move this one over and select both, make them both just a little bit narrower. There we go. Okay, and there's our windows in. Obviously you've got to put a couple in the side, but again I'll leave that to you. And there's our bay window. Now as I look at it here, I think maybe this was a little bit too big as a lip, so you know, I think might have to bring that in a little bit and just make it more like so, and it probably stands out a little bit too far as well. So it probably would have been more like so. Okay, but I will leave you to finalize any kind of last detailing you would like on this. It all fits in the window, and there is our bay window. Now when we come back, I want to talk about doing something with the chimneys, of course. And what else do we have left on this project? Basically just the chimneys left now, I think. As I've said before, I'm going to leave the back to you. Again, it depends whether you'll ever shoot the house from the back, but the windows will need cutting in here. Nothing we haven't done. And I'm going to take one last look around this bay window and see if I want to do any additional tweaks in between the parts. And if I end up changing the design at all, we'll go through that in the next part. So I will see you in the next part, when hopefully we will finalize all of the last details of the house, and then in the part after that we can get on with making some nice decorative ivy. Okay, so thank you for watching. I hope you found something useful in this, and I will see you in a second. Hi, welcome back. In the last part we did our bay window here. Now I was looking around the internet to match some reference for this, and I couldn't find anything that was very similar. And you know, I went back to the plans because it didn't seem to me like this would be a flat plank, and when I went back to the plans I noticed I've made an error. If we look at the plans for the bay window, what we've got is no wall here, so this wall should actually be flat, which would make this piece make a lot more sense as a support. So I would have re-recorded that entire last part, but I thought it was actually quite interesting the techniques we used to model this. However, I am going to get rid of it. I'm going to model back in more towards the original plan, and actually, you know, just having this here, it didn't quite complement the design of the window for me. So I think I'll get rid of this and we'll flatten this wall out and go back more towards the plan. There was, and I'm not sure if I've mentioned this yet, I found some reference here of what underneath of a bay window would look like, and I quite like this. I think it's more in keeping with the window we've done. But also I wanted to bring in, and this isn't, I'm not sure if I mentioned this before, but I wanted to bring in these colonial type shutters for our windows. I thought they were quite attractive. So that means the underneath of our window will match our shutters quite well. So that kind of worked out as well. So I'm not going to take out the part from the tutorial where we modelled that, because as I say, that lofting between two nerves curves is a handy technique, so I'll leave it in. But we are going to have to remodel this. So I'll just get on and do that. We're going to remove these faces because we need to flatten this wall back down, and I'm getting these top faces in here too. So just remove those, and then of course I have to remove the back faces. Okay, and now I want to join this back together so the wall goes back together. So I'm just going to come in and use my edge selection to bridge across here. And again, I apologize for that mistake, but sometimes you know, if you go from the plans you can miss small details. And if we look on the floor plan here, I had assumed this was a wall. I had assumed wrongly. So I'm just going to click bridge across there. And in fact I'll do the ones on the floor first. It will make them easier to see. So again, select and bridge. And I'll need to bring this vert in, just so it's in line with the rest of the wall. And we want to get this one pretty straight. There we go, that should do it. Now I can bridge across here. So edge selection once again. And one final hole to fill in up here. Now this hole's very not strictly necessary to fill in, as nobody will ever see it. But you know, while we're here, might as well. Okay, bridge. and that filled in that hole. So now we've got this window to make, and I'm actually going to keep this reference open on a separate window, but I'll pull it back in if I need to refer to it. So I'm going to make this shape, this one. So let's look at the pieces we've already built and see if they'd be suitable, because I don't really want to go to the trouble of remodeling all this shape again. So I'm just going to go to object mode. I'm going to take this whole window and duplicate it. I'm going to move it down, and that would kind of make the bottom portion. We need to get rid of some faces here, so let's get rid of all these top faces. Okay, and don't need these ones now either. Whoops, that one, that one, that one, that one, and that one, and let's get rid of them. And that gives me let's go up to object mode and pull this up. And that gives me a matching piece. So that's kind of the start of my whole shape. Then I'm going to grab the vertex from wrong object. There we go, vertex from down here, and pull them up. So bottom bar window will come out to about there. And this has already given me a fairly nice starting point. So if I just make that a bit thinner, if I pull the reference back in, we now need to make these side insert do 3 Watsits. So and on the reference this bottom piece is a bit longer, so I can take out some vertex here, and again I've got the wrong bloody building. There we go, vertex, and I'm just going to slide and pull just to make it a bit bigger. Okay, so it's not going to touch the floor, it doesn't in the reference, and let's have a look at this from a distance and give it an eyeball. And I think that looks a lot more decorative right now than what we had before, even though what we had before was quite a bit more complicated to model. So now I just need to make the inserts for the side here. So in order for us to get this to be a full panel, I could try bridging across the edge. So just edge selection and bridge, and it won't, because it would leave me with some unusual geometry. So instead I'm going to build the whole thing on its own piece. We could use the fill hole tool in that situation, but in this case it's not really necessary. These panels, and where's my reference gone? These panels here would be different bits of wood anyway, so really that's not so important for us to keep that all as one piece. And let's just get this to the correct shape. Now I'm going to use the front view for this. Okay, so that should be about the right size. It looks a little wide. Let's just scale this in. And now I should be able to pop it in there, and that will even allow me to keep an additional lip around here, because the more of these little lips you've got where the woodwork is sort of routed out the edges, the nicer it's going to look. So we can now take that and put a kind of box framework on it. So face mode, and I'm going to extrude. I'm going to clear the settings on the extrude tool, and this time I'm going to do a scaled extrusion inwards, a bit like so, and this will create part of the surround. So let's get that bit squarer, and I'm looking at the reference on the other window here, so maybe like so, and then I'm going to hit extrude again. And once again I'm going to do a scaled extrusion, and I'm going to come down to about here. Yeah, that looks about right to the reference. And what this is going to give me is this raised lip that I'm going to be able to pull out. So let's come in, and one more extrusion, and again scaled extrusion. And around there should do it. So from the reference we've got a bit that comes out. So let's select these faces and extrude, and this time I am going to extrude outwards just a little bit. There we go. And to create kind of another lip, I'm going to take this outside piece here, actually inside piece, sorry, and I'm going to extrude this one outwards, same as the other one, and then I'm going to scale the face in slightly to give it this kind of indented look. Okay, maybe I'll scale it a little bit more along Y, and that's looking about right for our cutout insert. Now we're going to have to bevel in some of these edges, and maybe this is sticking out a little bit too far, but I can just scale that whole thing back a bit. There we go. So let's put that in place, and I want to have that little inner lip. There we go. Okay, and I'm going to make it the same white color as the window so I can get a decent look at it. Okay, and that's looking pretty good, really. Now I'm going to bevel the edges of this before I duplicate it so I don't have to do it many times. So edge mode, select the whole row of edges around here and bevel. And again, this is going to come down to how much beveling you want. And I'm probably going to make this inside bit here. Let's just go to edge selection. I'm probably going to make it a bit bigger because I think this gap here is too wide, so I can just shove these up a little bit. There we go, and just come in and straighten that all up with a narrower gap there. Okay, now I've got a smaller gap. Now I want to select these and bevel them. Okay, that's too much. There we go. And the inside edges. Wrong one, this one. A little more. There we go. And you know, this might be a bit steep or not quite steep enough, but I think it's pretty spot on to our reference. I mean, I've done mine slightly differently to the reference because I've also done a raised center, whereas the reference doesn't have this raised center. But in our case, our shutters will. So I mean, there's plenty of ways you can do these kind of wooden board things. So please have a look and see if you can spot your own reference, maybe a design you like more. But for me, this works. Let's just push that in and check it works. Yeah, it looks pretty good. So now I need to duplicate it and get it to fit in the other hole. So Control D, pull it out. And I'm just going to come in and I'm going to space this one by eye. Whoops. Okay, so we should be about there. Okay, let me see what has happened here. Ah, yeah, it's just intersecting the front of that. Okay, great. So vertex and pull these ones this way. And I've got my move tool set on. There we go. Actually, I'm going to need to space this out before I rotate it. Otherwise, we're going to run into some problems. Okay, so whoops. This should be about good, I think. Let's go to object mode and shove it backwards. And in we go. Let's set the move handle to object. And just get that little lip again. There we go. And you know, I might need to play around a little bit with the exact spacing, but that seems good enough. So duplicate this one and just pop it over here. I might need to scale it a bit for this one. There we go. And the rotation's a bit off. And there we go. Now I've still got some beveling to do around these edges here and these edges here, but I'll do that in between the parts because I think you've got the idea of where to put those bevels and where not to. But this is looking pretty decorative. Obviously we will see a bit later on the render, but that works for me. Okay, there we go. So now we've got this very different bottom to our bay window, which I think will actually match very nicely with our shutters. Now, talking of our shutters, let's do those now. So I'll bring back some reference for them. And basically they're as wide as the window with exactly the same kind of thing we just cut here, cut in there. So let's make a piece that's as wide as this window first. So I'll jump into the front view and I'll just take a polycube here. So quick polycube. I'm just going to make a piece, as I said, that was as wide as one of these windows and as long, of course. And this will form the basis for our shutter. And this also gives me an opportunity to show you the symmetry options within the modeling toolkit. So let's pop that approximately into space, into place, sorry, not into space. That would be a little more difficult. Right, and we'll make a kind of thin window shutter sort of surround here. And I want it quite thin because I'm going to be extruding forward. So in order to get this piece into some kind of symmetry, I'll need to cut it in the center, and then I'm going to cut outwards from there. So once I've got a center point in it, I'll then be able to tell Maya that I want to work in symmetry. So, and that symmetry will depend if I've cut it down this way or this way. If I cut it this way, the symmetry will work here and here. If I cut it this way, then the symmetry will work here and here. Fairly self-explanatory, really. So I'm going to go to the multi-cut tool, and under my snap set, I've got mine set at 25%, which will be fine for this. I could set it at 50% and then it would snap exactly in the center. At the moment it will snap every 25%. So let's cut one line in the center. So just click and I've cut my line in the center. I'm then going to go to my edge selection mode. So I'm going to select this edge. Oops, I'm on the multi-cut tools, so I'll just have to go to Q for the selection. And then I'm going to hit symmetry. Okay, so it's stayed highlighted and it's polycube shape 117. So now it's symmetrical. So if I select this top edge, bottom edge, you'll see the top edge also becomes selected. And now it's selecting in blue to let me know I'm in symmetry. So if I go to my multi-cut now and cut an edge loop across this way, it'll also cut one across there. This is kind of perfect for what we're doing at the moment. Now I've got my reference of these colonial window shutters open in a different window, but I'll try and kind of scale it back a bit and leave it on this screen so we can all see sort of the same thing. Now it appears my window is a bit wider than this, but the principle will be exactly the same. So let's cut a surround for this. Now rather than actually cutting a surround for this, it might be easier if we select a face, select this face for example, and then use an inwards extrusion. So I'm gonna come along here, reset settings and extrude inwards, so on a scale, and there we go. And that's not going to work because now we've broken our symmetry, so we're going to have to do this a slightly different way. We'll just do it with a couple of edge loops instead so we can keep this symmetry. So I'll go on to multi-cut and let's create a piece in the middle like so, and then we're going to need a couple of edges, top and bottom. There we go. And then I could come out and draw in these edges. So these are quite wide on this shutter, one here and one here maybe. Now I think there might be a bit too much of a gap between these 2 points, but that's very simple to fix. We'll come in, select the whole edge, shift right click and hit the slide edge tool. Okay, and I've lost my symmetry again, so I'm just going to get that back. Come here, double click. I can just use the move tool for this, will be fine as well. Could have used the slide edge tool. Alright, now let's see if we can now extrude these inwards, because our outer shutters were actually 4 pieces of wood like so. So I'm now going to see if I can extrude while keeping symmetry. I can. So I'm going to do a scaled extrusion, and I'm going to extrude these in to the first point, so this lip here. So just a little lip really. And that should about do it. Just this way a tad. Then I'm going to extrude again on a scaled extrusion, and I'm going to, so this will be the first lip, this edge loop here. And then our second lip will also be quite small, like so. And then we'll have a third lip which will stay flat, so extrude once again with a scaled extrusion, and that's a little bit bigger, somewhere around there, maybe even a little bit bigger than that. Whoops, there we go, got the wrong scale handle there. Done. And then finally, so we've got the first, let's see, we've got one lip that will be recessed, another lip that will be recessed, one lip that will stay flat, and then we have an inner piece here that will be extruded outwards. So that looks like we've got all the geometry we need to create this. So I'm going to go to object mode so we can have a look at that. The first thing we need to do is extrude out this outer plane. Now if we'd have started with a thicker piece, we would have found ourselves extruding backwards, and this can lead to various problems. So whenever possible I prefer to extrude forwards. First select the face here, 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 here and here, and you can see we're still in the symmetry there, and extrude, and let's just give it some depth. Okay, so that should be about enough. And I tend to exaggerate these as well, that way I can always scale them back a little bit later, but especially for a tutorial it helps if we have a bigger lip so we can see what we're doing. And now I'm going to select these inner faces, this first lot, and it should have got the bottom ones. No, we dropped out of symmetry again, so symmetry, and we're back in. And extrude, there we go, and this time just a little bit back there like so. Whoops, they're quite tricky there. Done. And again I'm going to want these and extrude, and just a little bit further back there we go. Okay, and actually I'm going to need another extrusion because we need a flat piece in here now, so I'm going to go to object mode and I'm going to do another extrusion. I miscalculated because we've got the main part, then we've got one step, a flat piece and an inner piece, and at the moment we have no room for that inner other flat piece. So what I can do is use the multi-cut tool. I actually don't need to do another extrusion, and just put another edge loop in here. So we're done. We'll just make sure that put the same edge loop in there. It did. Okay, so as this piece here is going to be flat, I can go to face mode now, and it was still in blue, so I know it's still in symmetry, and I'm actually just going to pull this one up. That will give me this kind of, you know, inner slant here, and I want to pull that up until it's level with the rest of the shutter. There we go. So object mode. So we've created the shutter pretty much as it is in here. Now ours is probably a little too deep, and I'm definitely going to come in and bevel out some of these edges. So edge mode, select all the way around, double click to select the loop and bevel. Okay, and the same here, bevel, probably the same here. Anywhere that I really want to catch the light. Let's come in, gonna have to do these ones the hard way. Okay, no, they're not gonna work beveled. Let's just try that again and get a very small bevel on there. Now I think those ones will stay as are, and that's looking pretty good. Maybe this is a little bit too fat to be a shutter, so I'm going to take off the back faces. And we've dropped out of symmetry, but we don't really need it anymore. Let's take off these back faces. Oops. Fell out of face mode there, there we go. There was slightly more of them than I thought there was. There, done. Okay, so now I've got a pretty clean mesh and I'm back in symmetry. Okay, I'm going to go to edge mode. Just going to see if I can select this whole edge loop. I can. I'm just going to go to mesh fill hole. And there we go. So now we've got a thinner shutter, and I could make it thinner still by just scaling it inwards a little bit. There we go, because these things are more decorative, I think, than they are kind of storm shutters. And there we go, that should be about right, really. Let me just select this back face and pull it out. There, I want it bisecting our actual inner piece, and there we go. So if I move this into position now by a window, I can simply add these shutters in, and maybe they'd actually be, these appear to be taller, they'd want to fit the entire window, so I'll take the vertex up here and pull them this way, and then I'll take these ones and pull them this way just to make this a bit wider. And I think it's a bit wide, so I can kind of skinny this up a bit. There we go. And I would also angle this in, so this side is touching the wall and that side is standing out a bit like so. And let's assign our Lambert 3 material, and that just gives a little extra punch to our window. Let's set this on, yeah, let's just reset this tool, sorry. Okay, and move it out. And if you wanted to, you could make some sort of rounded hinge. Okay, but there we go. So there is our window shutter that matches pretty well now with the bottom of our kind of bay window here. And to get that in, I'm just going to duplicate it up here, and you know, you might have to, because these windows are not all a uniform size, so you might have to come in and kind of up a little bit and down a little bit. There we go. Move it into position. Whoops. Okay, so I'm going to position some shutters around these windows during the break, and the last thing I want to cover before we actually leave these part is just these chimneys. They're a pretty major structural element that are pretty easy to do, and you know, there's two of them, so it should be quick. And you know, as I look around this now with the shutters there and the bottom of this bay window, I think it looks a lot better than what we had before. So alright, let's get some chimneys on the way. So let's do this one first, and let's kind of scale this to a decent size because it's a chimney, so it's going to be fairly large, and move this one up here, and then I'll use the side view to get it, side and front views to get it lined up to the plans. So that's going to come out, sort of finish about there. And it's going to be about that fat. I will make the chimney pots and these kind of decorative surround bits on the top of the chimney, but for now I'll just come in. There we go. So let's check this out on the side view, and that would be the main chimney, I think. So I'm going to go to our other orthographic side view. Okay, and that's this chimney here. So whoops, I want to grab these verts, pull it in so it just about matches this way, and then this way as well. Okay, so that's one chimney in position. It needs a bit of decorative flourish, but I'm going to duplicate that to make the basis of the other one. Okay, and I'm going to just disappear into the front view and line this chimney up, because this one's on the side of the building. Maybe this one's actually a little skinnier. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to line mine up here, and then I'll just take the vertex and pull them down this way. Alright, so there's the basic shapes of our chimneys. Now, these kind of decorative bits, I don't know, they're probably not decorative actually, they're probably functional in some regard, but for us they'll be decorative. So multi-cut, and oops, Q for selection, multi-cut, there we go. And I'm going to put, just going to eyeball this one. So one in about there and one in about there. Same on the other side. I could of course have done this before I duplicated them, but there we go. Alright, so let's go and now do some extrusion. Face, and let's extrude both of these at the same time. In fact, just click here, you'll select the whole loop, and here, and you'll select the whole loop, and then extrude. So outwards like so. Perfect. A little much maybe. There we go. And now select the top row of faces and extrude again. And there we go. And that gives us this kind of decorative chimney edge that's up here. So same on the other side. And done. Now, chimney pots, looking pretty simple really, just sort of a flayed out cylinder with a lip on the top, easy enough. So let's grab a cylinder here, this one will do. And where's that gone? Need to be in object mode, which I would normally do by punching F8, but that will stop my recording at the moment, so I can't, so I have to just do it the awkward way. And let's get this up to the top of the chimney. Okay, should have done this in the 4 views, but you know, unfortunately I tend to get a bit stubborn once I've started something. There we go. So let's, and that's what you get for not doing it the right way. Alright, let's go in and match this up for scale. So our chimney pot is about that big. Okay, so it's going to have to be a bit bigger than what it is now. Done. And the bottom is flayed out, so let's take these bottom vertex and we'll just scale them outwards. Like so, and the top is flayed in a bit, so let's just scale these inwards. And then we've got that lip across there. So in order to make that lip, I'm just going to put in a couple of edge loops, so multi-cut. Like so, and then I'll take this, mine's a little further down than the lip on this one, there is some method to that. I'm going to grab these verts and shove them down a bit in a second. Face mode, I'll select this one and this one, which will select the whole loop, and then I'll extrude. Okay, I really don't like this extrusion, so I'm just going to undo that, and I'm going to reset the settings of the extrusion, extrude, and this time, whoops, okay, well that was annoying. Okay, face mode, yep, extrude, and just pull them out a little bit, there we go. Now to get this a more rounded look on the top here, I'm going to select this edge, bevel, and I'm going to use a fairly big bevel, and then I'm going to select the bottom edge and bevel that into. Okay, and I can shove these top verts down a bit now. Okay, just like so. Okay, and my chimney pot there is looking fairly okay. I'll just grab the vertex at the bottom and bisect them with the bottom of the chimney. And there we go. Now I think something strange has happened to my move tool, probably on the wrong setting. Let me just check all of my tools here. Okay, just going to reset all those just in case, because this looks a little oblong to me for some reason. So I must have done something to it. But anyway, it should be good enough for its intended purpose. So I'm just going to duplicate it across like so. And then I'll grab these, duplicate them, and move them over to here. Yeah, these are definitely a little bit wonky, so I must have done something with them in the making process, but you know, I think that'll be okay for the little chimney pots up there. Okay, so in this part we covered quite a bit. We've got our chimney in, we've got our chimney pots in, we've redesigned the bottom of our bay window, we've got shutters, and we've got our house almost coming to a completion. In the next part I just want to cover creating the guttering for this house, and the drain pipes and the fixtures and fittings for the drain pipes and how to bend pipe and stuff like that. So I hope you found something useful in this part, and again my apologies for that mix up with the bottom of the window. It was just, to me it looked like this was a wall on the plans, and you know, that simple mistake led to us getting a bottom of a window that was a bit ugly, to be honest, but techniques used to make it were quite useful, so I've left it in the tutorial. So I hope you've again found something useful, and I'll see you in the next part. Cheers. Okay, welcome back. So, you know, I've taken the liberty of dotting some of these shutters around. Not quite sure if I'll keep these ones here. Might be a bit overkill, but just these windows, these ones and these ones. So now we've got some shutters that match now the bottom of our bay window, and that's slightly off the plan because this bay window was slightly different on the plan and these shutters didn't exist, but I think they look nice and give a decorative touch. Now I just want to talk about the guttering, because we need to finish this roof off. It just comes to a kind of an abrupt end here. So to put guttering in, I will need something to attach the guttering to. So I'm going to start off with a simple polycube. Come out here, and I'm going to get this to scale by eyeball. So I just pressed F to focus in there on the object I was looking at, or the object I had selected. And I'm going to come in and I'm going to do guttering so it goes to about here. Okay, so I'll select those top vertex and shove them down a bit. There we go, that should be about wide enough, I imagine. Now let's grab these, make sure we've got them all, and push them to about here. Now the guttering is going to stop here, and a drainage pipe is going to come down, so we'll do all the pipe work too. Some quite interesting shapes to be made with that pipe work, so we'll go all the way across to this side and stop thereabouts. Okay, now I'm just going to do the guttering on this side and this side and all the pipe work for this. The plans call for some guttering around here, but again I'll let you do that and I will do it in between the parts because the process is exactly the same. So let's just center a pivot on this thing, and now we can rotate it, and J to snap rotation. There we go. Oh, looks like we didn't quite get to. No, obviously I wasn't snapping the rotation when I did it the first time. So let's get this into position, and we want it about here, like so. Just take a bit of time to line those edges up, and that appears they're about the same thickness into the wall, so that's done. Okay, so now we've got some and this guttering will probably come and finish. Let's see, about here, I would say. You can do some more precise placement, as I've said, and now we need the guttering to attach it to. So to do this, I'm going to use a poly pipe, and I'm just going to do a nice simple round gutter. The problem we're going to run into is this is too thick, so let's go to the channel box and change its thickness to say 0.1, and that should be thick enough. This is plastic guttering or aluminium maybe, depending, and I'm just going to cut it in half. So no, didn't quite make it. Let's see. There we go. So I'll just remove all these faces, and I'm going to need to fill these holes here. So edge selection and bridge, and the same over this side, of course. G to repeat the last command. Then I'll rotate this, snap its rotation, and again that seems to be failing me. There we go, done. And I'm going to rotate it this way as well. Alright, so this will form the basis for our guttering that runs along the house. So let's move it into position and sort of eyeball it into size. Now if you wanted to, you can get exact measuring for the guttering, but I've had a look and it comes in a myriad of shapes and sizes. So I'm just going to get mine, that's a little big, to sort of where it's poking out from the roof, and I think probably about half that size would do it. So you know it's going to collect rainwater and whatnot, and in my experience get full up with leaves and be extremely annoying, but there you go. And would that be a good size? Let me just extend this outwards so I can get a better sense of the scale of the thing. So I'll come out this way a little bit and then out this way and see this, you know, from a bit further back. And that still seems like a huge trough to me, so probably quite a bit smaller. There we go. And you want to make sure it goes over the underhang. Okay, and that seems to be a bit better scale there. So let's put this here. Object mode, vertex. And you know, there's some interesting ways to bend this stuff around corners, because I'm going to do a corner bend here. So I'm going to take this one and I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to put it around the corner. Now I want a nice sort of bend around the corner, so modify center the pivot on this, and then I'm just going to rescale it because it's not going to be that big for this wall. There we go, and hit J and hit E to rotate and J to snap. There we go. Okay, so now I've got this kind of thing, and I want to put a nice bend in here, so I'm going to pull these out so we can see what's going on a bit more. Okay, and then I'm going to line them up, and you're going to want to be pretty precise with this. Let's go here and just about here. Okay, and once you've got that layout done to your satisfaction, you want to push this one back a little bit, and that should about do it. So how we're going to achieve this kind of bent piece is to come in and select all these faces and these faces, and then do a bridge, but we're going to bend the bridge. Now in order to bridge between two pieces, they need to be a single piece, so I'm going to go up to Mesh Combine, and I'm going to select these faces and shift select these faces, and I'm going to go to bridge. Now this has given us a bridge, but you know, it doesn't look right. It's not what we wanted, so I'm going to change divisions to somewhere around 4, and then I'm going to go in under the channel box. I'm going to select this object and look for poly bridge, and I can change the curve type from linear to blend, and there we go. Now we've got some nasty geometry here, so this often happens. What we've gone and done is, or what I've gone and done, let me just undo this, and I'll undo this right to the point before we join these objects together, so I have two separate objects again. For this bend to take place, this one needs to come out a bit and over a bit to give us enough room to get that bend in there, because you know it's going to need to bend all of these in here as well as out here. So if they're too close together, you're going to come into a problem where you get that nasty geometry. So what I tend to do is line them up pretty precisely to start with. So I'll get them to pretty much where they want to be, and then from there I'll go by eye of the distance I want the bend to be around. So that bend would probably be a bit long, and this can take some trial and error, it really can. So let's try this, and again select both the pieces, shift select and mesh combine, and once again we'll try to select these faces and get a bridge. And as I've said, this depending on the size pieces and the kind of bend you want, this can be definitely a process of a bit of trial and error. So there we go, and then onto the attribute editor, channel box, sorry, select the object, and this time we shouldn't have any problem. There we go, and now we have a nice 90-degree bend around the corner. Now if you want that bend smoother, you can come into the bridge and set the divisions higher. There we go. And don't worry about this, the material's just dropped off it. If I was to select this and give it another material, say Lambert 4, you can see that that just goes right away. So it's nothing to be really concerned about. Now I can go and center the pivot for this. And now we have one guttering object. Looks nice. Let's get it into position. Whoops. Okay, there we go, and there we go. And let's have a look to see if that looks ginormous. It does not. It looks about the right size for a fairly large gutter. Now, as I said, you can make it smaller or larger depending on the situation, of course. And I'll just pull this one in a bit. There we go, object mode. So that's given us some guttering around this part of the house. Now, I want to, at the moment, I'm going to move this one a bit further back, I think. Yeah, that looks better. Okay, so I want to, at the moment, create the pipework that goes down, but we're going to need to put sort of a S-bend on that pipework. So, you know, this can be a bit tricky, and this should be pulled probably down a bit. There we go, so it's not right on the lip. And before I make that S-bend, I think I'll make some brackets to hold this in place, because it wouldn't just be floating in midair. So again, I'm going to use a poly pipe. W. There we go. And I'm just going to rotate this so it will be in the right axis, not the right axis, in the right place to hold this in, hold this up. Okay, and again I'm going to need to cut it in half, but before I do that, I'm going to go to its inputs and once again make it 0.1. Okay, chop it in half. Now we're going to need some method of fastening this to the wall, because this is all very well and good, but it needs to fasten to that baseboard we created specifically for the purpose. So after I fill these holes in, let's quickly do that, and we've got lots of divisions on our bridge, which is certainly not necessary here. So let's come in and fill these, and it will remember the last setting you used. Now, in order to get this to be more of a hinge, I'm going to come in and I'm going to use the multi-cut tool. I'm going to put an edge loop in here, and then I shall extrude this face outwards, okay, like so. So this is going to be the basis for our bracket, and I'm going to just move this up so it's straight, or in our case straight enough, and I'm going to grab these verts and straighten them all up too. There we go. Then I'm going to put another edge loop in, and I'm going to then extrude downwards. So let's go to face, Okay, and this will be the backboard for my bracket, so I'm going to need to extrude a bit further than that, maybe all the way down to there, and then I'm going to take these two faces and extrude them out. Okay, so that would be my kind of hanging bracket. I'm not sure if that's the way they actually fasten guttering, but that will do for me. So this would screw into the wall, and then this would hold the guttering. So let's object mode that. Okay, and let's get it up into place on the wall. Now we're going to have to scale this one a bit, of course, because it's going to be far too big. Alright, so this is going to sit on the wall here, or on our space provided especially for it. There we go. And it's just going to hold that guttering up like so. There we go. Kind of perfect, really. So, you know, little detail, and it's a bit long there, so let's pull it up. And you could go to the trouble of cutting screw holes and, you know, all sorts of things here. But there, that should be good enough just to hold our guttering in place. So I reckon there'd probably be one in the end here, and then maybe just dot a few along. Okay, and then obviously we need to duplicate some for around the corner. And yep. Okay, it appears that this side doesn't come out from the wall quite enough, so let's go like so. Actually, it must be a slight difference in the roof overhang, but you know, you can just, if you want to, grab these vertices from the roof here, these ones, and just pull this overhang out a bit more so it matches this one. And then let's just check our placement of our little guy. This one probably can shove in a bit, and then this one in a bit, and oh, whoopsies, and there we go. So I'll probably put one more of those in, so Control D again, and one more just to hold the end in place here. Okay, so that's some brackets to hold our guttering up. And really these little details, they will pay dividends in the end. So let's now take another, in this case we'll take a polycylinder to make the pipework that goes up and down. So fairly simple operation really. We'll just scale it to the right size. Oops. Okay, so kind of like so. That would look massive to me. So that's definitely not a good idea. And in order to scale in X and Z without scaling in Y, we can just hold Control and scale this down to about guttering size. Okay, and maybe that's still a little big. There we go. I think they actually have some guttering drawn in on the plan. So let's take, or you can't really see the guttering on the plan, but you can see this pipe here. So let's see how wide this thing is on the plan. And we are about right to scale. Let me just grab these vertex from down here and pull them up a bit. Okay, so we're about to scale there. The problem we run into is that we can't actually connect to the top pipe, so we're going to have to create an S-bend. So let me just go to object mode. And I'm going to make sure that this thing is right against the wall here. There we go. So I'm going to duplicate this because I want to make an S-bend that's exactly the same shape as this pipe. So I'm going to Control D to duplicate. And my S-bends aren't going to be anywhere near this big, so let's come in here and scale this down. Now this is going to need some divisions put in it. So we can use our Add Face Divisions tool. So spacebar to bring up this marking menu, and we want to go to Add Divisions. Let's pop open the options box. We don't want any in U, and we want a fair few in V. So let's just hit add divisions, and that adds some divisions for us. Now maybe I'll add a few more to get the pipe smooth. So add divisions, but I won't need as many as another 8, so maybe just another 2. There we go. Alright, so that's plenty of divisions to work with now. Now we'll again use animation deformer, so nonlinear bend. Alright, and from here I can go up to the attribute editor, open the bend, and we don't want any high bend or maybe any low bend. In fact, in this case it doesn't really matter. Let me just change the curvature so we can see what's going on. We want a 90-degree angle, and let's turn the high bend off. Okay, and then I'm just going to move the bend handle itself, and let's see, let's get that about right. See, I do want a sharper bend, so okay, let's get this to be a sharper bend. There we go, perfect. And then I can just move this into place. Yeah. Okay, so that's kind of the shape I'm looking for. Now I'm going to delete the history of this object. Edit, so I'm going to delete by type, history. And in order to create an S-bend, I'm just going to duplicate this, move it like so. I'll rotate it. Whoops, playing silly beggars on me. There. And if I push these two together, that will create me this kind of S-bend. Okay, but I think we're going to have an S-bend that's too wide, so I'm going to come in and I'm just going to cut out all of this lot, and then I'm going to do the same over here, all of this lot, and then I'm back to object mode. Whoops, I got too many over there. Okay, that's better. Now I can come up here. Having one of those days, sorry about that, and join these two pipes together. So I just need to pull down here like so, and then to join these together, just make sure you have no faces on the inside, which we do not. Let's go up here. To join them together, I'm going to hit mesh, combine, but that by itself is not actually enough. So we'll need to merge these verts. Now you go into vertex mode, you can select both of them, and you can just hit edit mesh, merge components. You can get it on the shift right click menu, merge vertices there, or you can do it with the modeling toolkit with the target weld as we've discussed before. So I'm going to go and pause the video while I weld all these points together, because watching this is about as interesting as watching paint dry, and I'll be back in a moment. Okay, so that's all joined together nicely, just took a minute there, and now I want to fit my S-bend to the top of my pipe and see if it all works. So let's bring it out this way, and again we'll need to center the pivot because we joined two objects together. There we go, and Maya suffers from a bit of confusion when you do that. She doesn't quite know where to put the pivot point. So let's get this kind of lined up, and let's move it upwards. Okay, and now hopefully I'll be able to rotate this into place. Is that 19? No. There we go. And when I pull this part out, that part should hit the guttering. And it does. Might have to shrink it down a bit. That's just about there really. So I might have to grab, say, all of these vertex here and move them in just a little bit, and then select the next line, move it in just a little bit, oops, right, and the next one. There we go. Anyway, you get the idea, and that should be, yep, now it's in the guttering. Perfect. Okay, so we could even smooth this, so that makes it nice and smooth out, and smooth this. Now, the edges are going to crumple when we smooth, so let's make that not a problem anymore. But first, I want to join this drain pipe to this one. So let's check if we have any faces we need to get rid of. We do. We cannot have, and I'm going to select a vertex up here just to focus the camera on, so I can move my camera around easy. So we cannot have these faces here or here when we join these two pipes together. So let's go to face selection mode, and this time I'm going to use the drag tool, which will just give me this paintbrush-like selection apparatus, so I can delete. Much easier than going one and then shift and one. So here we go. Let's do that again. There we go. Much easier. So I'm going to go back to marquee, and I will now object mode this. And that's a bloody long pipe. Let's just center its pivot. There we go. And I'm going to move this up till it bisects with this up here. There we go. Now I'm going to get a duplicate of this before I combine it with anything, because I might need it for something else and I don't want to make it again. Now I'm going to select this one and this one. Do the mesh combine. And I'm just going to once again join all the vertices up together. So I'll probably pull this out from the wall. Select some vertex around here, focus in on them. That'll let me concentrate easier, and then I'll just use a target weld to just kind of pump these together. Okay, so I'll actually pause the video here again, so you don't have to watch this, and I'll be back in a second. Okay, so I've got those lined up. Now if you wanted to smooth out this whole pipe, you'll notice we get a bit of a dimple at the top, and we should have a problem at the bottom where it goes into this point, but we can fix that as we've discussed before with a control edge loop. So let's multi-cut, and that seems to be snapping for some reason. Let me put this at 5%, and let's try that again, shall we? And one there, and I'll put one down there. Okay, now when I hit 3, that shouldn't smooth out too much. And maybe we could do with one at the top to hold this edge a bit better too. There we go. Okay, object mode. Now we've got a very nice drain pipe with a bit of S-bend in there. So I'll just put that to the wall. There we go. Magic. And let's actually, we're going to move this holdy brackety thing out there, and we're going to pop this, center its pivot again out this way a bit. There we go. So I'm going to hide this. I'm not sure if I'm actually going to be needing it again, but just in case. And that would be slightly off the floor, and it is. So now all we need to do to finish off our guttering is to make a bracket to hold this in place. So this is going to be fairly similar to the way we made this one, with a couple of slight differences. So I'll start off with a poly cylinder. And again, I'm going to, actually that would be about right for this bracket, so let me just make it a little thinner. And I'm going to come in and chop it in half once again. Okay, and fill in these holes. Okay, and for this one I want to extend it along a bit. So I'm going to make sure all these vertices are straight, vertex. I'm going to take them, come in here and scale them straight. Okay, that should be straight enough now. Let's have a look at them. Yeah, they look pretty straight. So I'm going to extrude out those two faces. And why am I not getting... okay, sorry, I'm having issues with my mouse button. And extrude outwards. Okay, so just a little bit should be fine. And now I can put a couple of edge loops in. And same on this side. And then select this face and this one, and extrude, and this becomes the basis of my bracket for this pipe. So object mode, and you could bevel this in. You can even cut screw holes in it and stuff should you want to, and if you want to cut a quick screw hole, you can use the same technique we used to make these holes here. I would texture mine in, and I'm never going to shoot the house from close enough that, you know, non-textured screw holes wouldn't do the job. So for me, that's not too important with those. Okay, and a little bit this way. Okay, maybe just a little bit this way as well. Okay, I like to leave a bit of gap because that shows in the render. You know, if you get everything too precise, it could look like one component, and it kind of defeats the object of you making these brackets. So let's move a few of them about. Control D, let's put one about halfway up, and then I reckon probably where the first and second floor meet, and then I reckon probably one at the top to hold it up there. And there we go. So that is guttering. It's all nicely screwed to the wall. It all makes sense. It's the right size. It might be that it's a trifle too big, but I don't think so. And you know, that pretty much concludes most of the major modeling elements for the house. Well, that does actually conclude the modeling elements for the house. When I come back, I want to discuss just getting a quick ambient occlusion render, because you should be able to get a fairly decent render out of this just to see what you've made. And I also want to take a look at the ivy that was growing up this window in the reference images. So I want to show you how to do that ivy, and we'll also look at any finishing tweaks that might need doing. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next part. Okay, welcome back. In this part I want to show you how to do the ivy that we have around the window here. Now if I bring up the original reference, you can see there's a bit of ivy here, and there's a bit here, and there's a bit in this window, or at least it appears to be ivy, and I can see some growing on this tree, so it makes sense. And I wanted to show you how to achieve that quite quickly. The other thing I wanted to do was, if you look on the architectural plans, there's these little holes in the beams, which my guess would be for some sort of doweling system to hold everything in place. So I'm going to drill those out now, and I'll just do a few. I mean, it is pretty obsessive attention to detail, really, so you can definitely get away with texturing those in, you can get away with leaving them out altogether, but I'm going to put them in. So I'm going to start with one of these, polycylinder. And I'm just going to come along and go like so. Then I'm going to get it to scale on the plan, which we're pretty sure is going to be a very small scale. So let me just get it out a bit and disappear into the front view. And this really is some sort of micro detailing here. And actually on the plan it's very difficult to estimate what size, but I would say about that size. So I can then use this to kind of drill holes in the wall, but that's not really good enough because I want a kind of tapered hole effect here. So I'm going to take my multi-cut tool, I'm going to cut across. Okay, I'm going to cut across again. Then I'm going to take these faces here, and let me just go into face mode. And again, let me check my modeling toolkit. There we go. Done. Alright, so I'm going to take these faces, or in fact probably this edge would be better. I want a sort of tapered hole effect, so I'm going to take that edge, sorry, not face, and I'm going to scale that in like so. Okay, so just scale it in a little bit more, and this is going to provide, you know, I'm creating an actual drill bit here is what I'm doing. So I can then put another edge loop in. I'm going to need another one like so, and this will allow me to select this edge, whoops, and scale inwards, move it out a bit, there we go, and inwards. So I've created sort of a tapered drill bit effect. Now I'm just going to want to make sure that that always bisects what it's going through, so I'll make it a bit longer. And then I'm going to go to object mode, and I'm going to use this as a drill. So I'll push it in to the beam that I want to cut here, and what I want to do is bisect it so that happens. Okay, so I've got it in, and I'm going to select the beam itself. In fact, let's do a few all at the same time. So they seem to be sort of where these beams are, which makes sense. So I'll select these as a set and Control D and just move them into the middle of where these beams are. Control D and out we go, Control D and out we go, Control D and out we go, Control D, and there we go. Alright, so that seems to be all the ones that would be required for this beam. I'm also going to duplicate a couple of spares, because when I boolean these will disappear. So select the thing you want to drill into, and then come along and select all these little widget drill bits, if you like, and mesh, boolean, and we want to do a difference. So let's just click there, and there you go. So now I've got these kind of shaped drilled in holes. Kind of cool, really. There you go. So they come with a kind of an insta bevel. What I would then do is take a cube, a poly cylinder, and scale it down and make a little plug for these holes. Just the way they would have done when they originally fitted them, I guess. They drilled the hole and then they knocked in a round wooden dowel. So if you want to get an obsessive attention to detail, there you go. Now on with our ivy. So that was just one little bit that you'll see in the final render that I wanted to cover, how it was done. Now on with the ivy. So to generate the ivy, I'm going to use a program called Ivy Generator, and you can find it under this address, which I'll include in the tutorial readme. But if you just type Ivy Generator into Google, it's probably the first thing that comes up. It's for every major platform, and better still, it's free. It does a wonderful job. Can't praise this tool highly enough. So I also used it in my realistic outdoor environments tutorial, if you want to check that out, and that's a bit of an advertising plug, so I shall stop that now. But in order for us to get this ivy, so you know, I want ivy to grow up on this roof, but really I could grow it anywhere I wanted to. So this technique will apply if you want to grow ivy up the side of a house, a tree, up the roof, up this and this roof. So you select the components that you want your ivy to grow on. So for us, let's say I wanted my ivy to grow on the second floor, but also this roof, but also I wanted it to be able to come along and grow on these beams. So I'm going to select every component that I want ivy to be able to grow on, and for me it's just this. So I'm going to get basically most of the top floor, and then I'm going to duplicate the top floor, so Control D. I'm going to open the outliner, and where I've had those duplicates created, let's find out. Let me just have a look here where these are. Roof sections. Okay, and this is why you want a clean outliner. Let me just make sure I actually did duplicate those. Yes, I did. So where is this one? Let's see. Okay, and then where is this one? Okay, I see what's happened there. That's fine. So I've got this roof section. Actually, let me do that a different way, folks. In fact, yeah. Let me go back to just before I duplicated this lot. And what I'll do is I'll Control G and group that lot. So I've got one group I can select easily, and then I'll duplicate the group, Control D. So I'm going to hide the original group, so Control H, and basically I'm going to do a mesh combine on this group. So mesh combine, and that combines that into one mesh. So if I pull that out now, it's all one mesh. Now I'm going to take this into Ivy Generator, tell the Ivy Generator to start generating ivy, and it's going to come up and start generating my ivy. Unfortunately, it can only work with triangulated meshes, and the simpler your mesh, the better it's going to work. So the first thing I'll do is mesh reduce. So this has reduced this mesh quite a bit, you know, but it still retains the same shape. So we can probably do that again, mesh reduce. Okay, yeah, sorry, mesh reduce. Okay, and we want to get it as low as possible while retaining its basic shape. So I can't actually do this reduce, it's gone too far, so I'm going to have to undo that. Okay, so now I can't use this geometry either. I need to triangulate it. Ivy generation only works with triangulated meshes, so just mesh triangulate, and that will triangulate up the whole mesh for us. So right now I've got something that looks like this, and now you can understand why I made a duplicate of it, because obviously I do not want my final geometry to look like that. So we're going to export this as an OBJ. So basic, yeah, okay, sorry, just had a bit of a conniption. So you want to go up to Settings, Preferences in the Plugin Manager and make sure you've got OBJ Export ticked. And then you want to go to File, Export Selection, and in our case I'm going to call this second floor. Okay, so that's exported that out for the Ivy generator, which I will just open here. So if you've downloaded it, you'll have a directory called bin, and in there will be a program called IvyGen. Okay, and this is what it looks like. So we import our object, so second floor in our case, and there is our second floor object. Now on Ivy generator, the right mouse button, hold in and out, will zoom in and out. The left mouse button will rotate like this, and if you hold control on the left mouse button, you'll be able to pan about. Now I find it very cumbersome to get about in this viewport. Not that I'm complaining, mind you, because we have here a most excellent free piece of software. So, you know, it just takes a bit of getting used to. Right. So once we come into place, we need to pick a point for our ivy to start growing. Now I'm not going to explain all of this stuff. I mean, most of it's self-explanatory. The branch size, the leaf size, the probability. This is the overall ivy size, and you can read all about that on the website. I'm just going to give you a demonstration of, let's say we wanted to grow some ivy up here on the side. I'm going to click around until I get one of these green points. Now you might have to click quite a few times before IvyGen finds a point that it's comfortable with, but once it does, you just hit grow, and that grows some ivy out there. When you've got enough, hit grow again and it will stop, and now hit birth. And there we go, we've given birth to some ivy. Now this is too big for me, so I'm going to turn the ivy size down and hit birth again, and maybe that's still a little bit too big, so birth again, and maybe I'll turn the leaf size down a little bit too. There we go, that's a bit more like it. So, you know, once you're happy with the look of some ivy that you've got, so let's try a point here and hit grow, see where that goes. That's quite nice. Birth, there we go, that's given me some ivy up there. Once you're happy with that, export. So I'm going to call this new ivy 01, okay, and export that. Now I also want a bit of ivy that come down here to overhang off this side of the roof, so I'm going to hit grow. Maybe I'll grow that a little more, and birth, and there we go. So I'm going to export that as well. So I'll call this new ivy 02, and you don't have to grow it all in one lump is what I'm trying to get at. You can actually come on and, you know, grow in several different clusters. So I want some ivy over there, birth. Okay, so export, and new ivy 03. So let's import these into Maya, and now I don't need this anymore. I've already exported it, so I'm just going to hit delete and then I'll unhide this group, Shift H. Hang on, he says. Okay, there we go, and my original geometry is back. So let's just bring in our ivy, so import, and ivy new, let's see, new ivy 1. Okay, I'm going to have to do it one at a time. So there you go, there is our ivy come in, looking pretty decent, a little bit up the side there. Now file, import, let's import batch 2, and file, import, let's import batch 3. Now I did this pretty quickly. You can obviously take a lot more time on your ivy placement, but that's it. Fantastic little tool. So if you wanted to, you could export the ground floor, even the floor plane if you had one. And let's put a floor plane in now while I think about it, just because I'm going to render in a second. So if you had a floor plane, you can export this to, start the ivy off here and then have it go up and crawl up the side of the house. Just depends on what you export for the view. Now, the last thing I want to cover in this tutorial is just how to get a ambient occlusion render out of this, because you've put a lot of work in so far. Hopefully you've got something that looks similar to mine, or with a bit of luck better, and now you want a quick render of it. So if you don't know how to do this, I'm going to show you, because it's very simple. So we're going to select everything we can see in the scene except the reference images. So I'll just probably hide those reference images away on our display layer, and I'm just going to drag select everything I can see in the scene. I'm then going to go to render layer and create a new render layer with everything selected. So basically the same way we did for our reference layer, but instead of a display layer, a render layer. I'm now going to click into this render layer, go down to its attributes. Actually that's not what I wanted, so let's go back to the, and yeah, I want to go to its attributes. Sorry, I just hit the wrong thing apparently. Go to presets and go to occlusion. Now this will turn everything pitch black. This is because what this setting is done is it's assigned a surface shader to everything, and then to that surface shader it's put an MIB ambient occlusion node. So now we need to come in and tweak the ambient occlusion node. So 64, this will deal with the overall quality. The lower this is, the grainier it will be. And this is the spread of the ambient occlusion. So I'm going to spread mine out a bit. I'm going to leave the brightest point at white, the darkest at black. I don't really want to set a max distance for the occlusion, and neither do I want any occlusion fall off. Now one thing I do want to do is look at my camera settings, because we're shooting at the moment with a 35mm lens, and really I would never shoot a house with a 35mm lens. I'd do it with a 75mm. There we go. So let's get this into position, and if we turn on our resolution gate, that will show us exactly what we're taking a picture of. So let's go this way a little bit. I'm just trying to get all these details in here we modelled, and I'll make my render a little bigger, so I'll go up to HD 1080, and for the quality I'm going to shove the adaptive sampling up a bit higher. If you're on an older version of Maya, this is your anti-aliasing settings. So I'm going to take a render of this, and I'll be back in a minute when we can see pretty much what all our hard work has done for us. Okay, so I let that render out, took about 3 minutes, and as you can see we've got a fairly majestic looking property here. Now there's the ivy we generated, and they're coming through as square tiles at the moment. Obviously you would texture those with some sort of leaf texture, and again that's covered in my outdoor tutorial. There'll be another volume to this tutorial as well, where I go through the texturing and putting it in a surrounding and stuff, so look out for that. It should be available at the end of February, beginning of January kind of time. Sorry, at the end of January, beginning of February. And really I'm gonna do one final part on this tutorial. I think we've pretty much covered everything we need to cover. There are a few things that are slightly out of place, like these windows could do a little bit of adjustment, just a little bit of moving. This second floor here is standing a little bit proud of the first floor, so it just needs to be pushed back a little bit. Must have moved that ever so slightly at some point. This ivy was a bit much for me, it was a bit too much of it, so I took the liberty of generating some more, and it came out like this. I kind of prefer this. Sometimes less is more, as they say. We've got our shutters on here, and as I say, in the final part I'll go along and I'll tidy everything up, and maybe there's a few decorative tiny details I might put in, some embellishments on these windows. So anything I do in between now and then I'll cover then, but pretty much we've finished with this. All the modelling is done. The house looks very nice. I'll leave the back of the house to you, as I said, but yeah, I'm happy with the way it came out. Considering we used extremely simple techniques and tools, this bay window looks really nice now. I think we managed to do a good job. So hopefully you've taken something from this tutorial. If you go ahead and make this house, or you make one based on the techniques, please stick it up on the SimplyMaya forum. I'd love to see it. You'll get some great feedback there. Also, if you need any help with this, if you've run into a problem, you can post on the SimplyMaya forum. A lot of very helpful people there. Or if you want to contact me directly, you can get me at Dave or David at simplymaya.com if you want to email. So thanks for watching. I'll see you in the last part where we'll just do a quick rundown of any changes that might have been made. Cheers. Hi, welcome back. So in the last part we pretty much finalized the modeling of our house. Now you'll see I've added some detail in here. I actually went to the trouble of tiling the roof in the end. Now, as I think I mentioned previously, you can do this with displacement. You can do it with a simple bump map if the roof is going to be far enough away. However, if you want a really high resolution shot, then I pretty much would recommend doing the tiling. Now, this is a very laborious, time-consuming task, so I'm going to show you a few tips for how I did this and made the process a bit less painful. And don't get me wrong, this process is time-consuming, regardless of how you do it. If you look at our tiles, they're actually all slightly different. Well, actually, there's about 6 or 7 different variants of tiles. So they're slightly different sizes. Some of them are kind of curved a little bit, some of them are flat. So there's about 6 different varieties of tile that are laid in a random pattern across the roof. As you can imagine, placing all this lot, just by using the move tool, rotate for every tile would be far too time consuming. Now, there are a couple of methods for quicker placement, one of which I'm going to show you, which is one of my preferred ones. But before we get into that, I just want to show you a couple of the other things that are modeled in. So basically, what I modeled in was these window hinges, which are very simple. It's just a poly cube, 2 edge loops to connect 2 half cylinders to the end there. And then this is just a cylinder with a face extruded, a cylinder and a cylinder. So really nothing you shouldn't be able to quickly do. And as to this, it's pretty much the same. It's just a cube, a torus, and a cube with half a cylinder on the end that's been beveled, and then just extruded some faces out of the cube, extruded the faces downwards and extruded them that way, and you get this kind of shape. So I'm not going to actually do this on camera. Pretty much created the same way we made these things. And to be honest with you, this detailing is for close-up work. If I take a look at one of the renders we've got here, it's barely visible. So you don't have to be too precise with this if you're shooting from a distance. I also, as you can see in my render, went through with that sort of Boolean drill bit we made and drilled holes where these dowel points for these beams would be. So, the major change really is this roof tile. So let me show you how we would place these roof tiles by hand using the traditional kind of move and rotate tools, and then you can see for yourself that this is probably not a good idea. You can do it that way. It's going to be extremely time consuming. So I'll open up an earlier version of this scene file. And I will of course include all the scene files with a tutorial, so if you want to come ahead and look at how anything was done, you can just open up one of the scene files. So let me open up part 16. Okay, and that's the model without roof tile. So, let me just create a tile. I actually counted the number of tiles on the reference image and based the size of tile from there. You can use larger, smaller, whatever you'd like, different style of tile. This is just a very simple kind of tile. So let's start off with one tile before we go any further, and let me show you, just what you're dealing with in terms of placement. So I'm going to move this tile up and I'm going to get it to the roof. And then I'm going to try and place it on the roof. So obviously I'm going to rotate it to approximately the right kind of rotation, and then I would move it down, but now it's overhanging the edge of the roof, so I've got to move it back and then up. And of course you can help yourself with this by changing the move tool settings. So double click on the move tool to say object, and then this will slide a bit easier. So that's one tip. Always be aware of the rotational of the axis of your pivot point. We come in here, kind of move it down. Okay, so that's the first tile on the roof. So Control D, and then I move one up, and I want to put one behind it. But this one has to be rotated. But when I rotate it now, the back's going to disappear into the roof, and we definitely don't want that. So then we need to move this up to get the back to remain there, and then I need to rotate it again to get the front down, but now the back's lifted up, so I'm moving it again, and as you can see, you'd be at it for a month of Sundays. So the first thing we need to do with this tile is change the location of its pivot point. So if I just move that out so we can see it a bit better, at the moment the pivot point is here, right in the center of the object. Now what I want is a pivot point that's about here. So when I pivot this tile, the back stays where it is and just the front lifts up. So I'm going to press Insert on the keyboard, and then in order to get this in the correct location, I'm going to use Snap to Points up here. Then I'm going to pull this, snap it to one of these bottom points. I'm going to hit W, whoops, we are still on Snap to Points, so I don't want that. Insert again, and I'm going to move this pivot point just approximately into the center of the tile. There we go. Now when we try to put our tile down, so I'll put this back on the roof, and now I've put the base in line with the roof, and when I rotate, only the front will rotate up and down. So that makes doing the second layer of tiling considerably easier. Just moving that pivot point is a very good start when you're doing something like this, but that only goes so far. I still then have to Control Duplicate and go along like so, put this tile in, and then Control Duplicate when I put the other tiles. So this one is rotationally now wrong, so we'll move it up and down. And on our finished render, I'm not sure if I mentioned, there's about 3,500 tiles. So this is going to take a while, and it's just a very annoying way to do it, really. So I can show you a better way. And I use a script for object placement. I use it for more than just tiling. I use it when I'm doing exterior scenes and I want to place a bunch of flowers or grass or trees down. It's a very good script for just placing objects within Maya. So if I open up Creative Crash here, you'll see the script you're looking for is SP Paint 3D. So you're going to want to go ahead and download this and put it in your scripts folder. Now if you're on Windows, that'll be Documents, Maya, the Maya version, in my case 2015, in a folder called Scripts. If you're on Mac, it's in your Home folder. You might have to look up where, for your particular version of Maya and which operating system you're on, where to place the script. But it's a fairly simple script to install. You just basically download it and copy it to the right place. So once you've done that, and you may need to restart Maya, so if you install it and you've got Maya open, you might need to save your scene, close Maya and open it again. As soon as you've done that, you can execute the script by typing this, SP Paint 3D, and if I go to Maya, just in this mailbox here, type SP Paint 3D and hit return, you'll see the script pop up. Okay, you can also put this on a shelf. So if you look here, I've got a custom shelf. This will also open it up. So I've got that ready every time I open up Maya. Now if you want to do this, you're going to have to click this little drop down icon, new shelf. This will give you a new shelf, and once you've got a new shelf, you can go to add a new item to it. So if we go to edit shelves, which would be shelf editor, there we go. Click here to add a new item, and then the command is the same as you put in this mail line, SP Paint 3D, and that will give you a nice button that you can bring it up with. You can change the icon and other stuff, but I'm not going to go into it. Alright, so let's get our box. Right, I'm going to use this tile. Now the nice thing about SP Paint 3D is you would be able to create multiple tiles, and I'm just going to set it to translate and rotate back to default, and I'll leave the scale where it is. So let's create another one based on this. So just Control D, and this one I'll make just a little bit thinner to give us a little bit of variance between the tiles, because they wouldn't be identical in the real world, especially these slate tiles come in, they're pretty close but not exact. So however many varieties you want, just keep duplicating and sizing, and that'll give you your tiles. I think For the render we've got here, I used about 6 different varieties of tiles, so you don't need to go nuts. Okay, back to Maya. So now I've got my pivot point in the right place, which is cool. I have my tile variants, so I'm going to select both of these and click Add to the brush geometry. Then I need to give it a mesh to place the objects on. So in our case, I'm going to click this roof and click Add to Target Surface. I want to make sure Align in Surface is on, and I want to make sure Instance is on. This way I'll be making instances of the geometry, which is a better idea than simply duplicates of the geometry. This will be easier for Maya to handle, you use less memory, and it has other benefits which I will show you now. So now let's go and put our tiles on. So I'm going to click Place and click and hold, and I got tile, there we go, I got tile, and you can see it's bringing in randomly, there's 2 different size tiles, and I got tile, and that's perfectly aligned to the surface. Now I need to place the next layer of tiles, which will require some rotation. So I can come up to the rotate and go minimum, say, -7, maximum -7. Let's try that. And there you go. That comes in rotated. And because it's rotated from the back, it comes in perfect. So now you can get on with placing your tiles in pretty quick order. Now I overlap mine like so. Okay, so I'm not going to go through and tile the whole roof. I think even with this SP Paint assistance, it took me a good couple of hours, 2.5, maybe 3 hours, to tile the whole roof. So I will leave that to you. Now, the reason we made these instances here instead of copies is because now, let's say I decided these roof tiles are far too simple and they need beveling. I can take my master object and go Mesh, Bevel, Edit Mesh, and let's do an edge bevel. There we go, and that's beveled. And if I come in here, you'll see all of those that were copied from that object are now beveled. If I make a more obvious change, let's click here, let's go to our modeling toolkit and use the multi-cut tool. I can throw in a few edge loops here. Let's grab some vertex to bend this. So I'll just grab these and let's bend this up in the air like so. And if I come up here, you see all that connected instance geometry is also bent. So this lets you put down lots of tiles with multiple different geometry shapes. It lets you put them down as simple cubes and then come in afterwards and bend them. I mean, if you wanted to smooth these now, I could hit smooth there, and all of these smooth also. So once you've finished putting all your tiles in, you'll want to select them, because you don't want thousands and thousands of pieces of individual geometry. So once you're done, select them, hit Mesh, Combine. This will combine them into one object, which obviously we've got now 2 levels of smoothing on this, so we don't want that. And to be honest with you, I would never smooth these. There's too many of them. You create too much geometry. But just as an example, that what you do to the master object also applies to the instance object. And then Mesh, Combine, and you've got one object, and that will make Maya nice and speedy. So basically that was how the tiling was done. You just need to grab this SP Paint 3D, which, as I said, if you load the geometry for trees or bushes or grass in here, you can then go along and plump down clumps of grass and stuff like that. Very useful script. You can also use the paint option, which will just paint on your surface. So let's come in here, and if I use Place, actually I can't because I've combined these now, so you shouldn't do that until you're finished. So I use Place like so, and that will just place the tiles. I can use Paint and put a distance threshold of about 1.2 maybe, and then I should be able to come along and just paint tiles across. There you go. So if you've got a steady hand and you know what you're doing and you want it rapidly, and this is great for old roof tiles that are maybe all kind of falling apart, or old brick detailing, you can literally just come in and paint some of that geometry in. Fantastic little tool. I thoroughly advise you, even if you decide not to tile the roof, to add this to your kind of Maya arsenal of scripts that you use. Plenty of uses for it. So that does that. Now I covered here how we made these simple components for the windows, which are not actually in this file. And I'm just going to open up my scene file here, my last one. Okay, because there was one other thing I just wanted to cover, because we talked about doing the ambient occlusion render, and if I look now, I have many of these render layers. I've got this one, I've got an ambient occlusion one, and then I've just got some masks. Now, all I use these masks for is to help me edit a little bit in Photoshop, and to make one, I just turn everything I want masked white with a white surface shader, and everything I don't want masked black with a black surface shader. So I've got a mask for the roof, a mask for the windows, a mask for the beams, a mask for the patios, and how I would use these. So here's an image I created in Photoshop, and there's one from the other side, and I've got one here that's got all those masks applied to it. So let me just close this down and let me open up one of the images that I saved. So under images, I'll go into those ambient occlusion renders and I'll grab this part 17. Now this is a 32-bit image, so I'll need to convert it to a 16-bit image to work on it properly in Photoshop. So okay, so that's the ambient occlusion render you get out of Photoshop, and this is the kind of renders that I produced from it. Now that's why I use the masks. So if I add, let's say, a brightness contrast adjustment layer here, and I increase the brightness and contrast, that'll increase the brightness and contrast of the whole image. Maybe that's not what I want. So the masks are basically, let me open one up, and let's take a large one like the roof mask. So here is my roof mask. So as you can see, everything that I want masked is in black, and that's a black surface shader, and everything else is in white, and that's a white surface shader. So from here I'm going to click Control A to select the whole image, Control C. I'm going to go over to this mask here, I'm going to go to channels, make the mask visible, and Control V to paste it in, and that's it. So make that invisible again, go to here, and this time when I adjust the brightness and contrast, I'll just get the roof. Okay, so that was basically all I wanted to cover in this last part. There really wasn't much to it other than the fact that we put these roof tiles down, which I said you can be done with displacement, can be done with bump mapping, and it is a pretty laborious task. I put back the ivy that we created, I think, in part 16. I basically just went round with our little drill bit, drilled these holes, and you know, that was it, really. So pretty simple to put the roof tiles down, as long as you've got this SP Paint script, which again definitely comes highly recommended from me. And that's it. So I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. As I said before, if you make anything based on it, I'd love to see it up in our forum. And if you have any questions for me personally, you can get me at David or Dave at SimplyMaya.com. So thank you again for watching, and I will see you hopefully in volume 2 when we cover some texturing and environment techniques. So bye.